Welcome to the APM tutorial series. This video demonstrates how to use APM to evaluate potential damage caused by a client that was identified as a threat. APM is integrated with OCI Threat Intelligence Service. With this integration, APM can now flag the transactions initiated by end users if they are identified as potential threats. I have an APM dashboard open on my screen, which shows the transaction data that are marked as threats in the last 24 hours. And I can see that threats were coming from these 4 IP addresses listed in the Threat Transaction Volume widget. Out of all IPs monitored by APM, these 4 clients were detected as threats. This information is provided by Threat Intelligence. Looking at the pie chart, I see 2,000 transactions executed as threats during this period, and more than 90% of them are categorized as open source. There are also other types of threats with a smaller number of executions. Next, let's drill down to each type of threat by selecting the threat type from the filter menu. First, I'm selecting open source, which has the largest number of threats reported. This will update the widgets in the dashboard with the information specific to the open source. From the map view, I can visually see where the transactions are coming from. And looking at the services view, I can see that it was executed in the storefront. This is a microservice that runs the login page of the application. You can also see this information in the Transaction Volume Overview widget as well. All the transactions are coming from the single IP from a specific location, which is Qingdaoxi City in China. I also can see how much the attack costs me by looking at the resource widgets. However, this time the memory and CPU consumption was trivial. While the open source threat executed a significant number of transactions, it may not be dangerous as we initially thought. Nonetheless, it is advisable to monitor it closely. Now let's look at another threat type. I am selecting commodity this time. And this seems to require more attention. Looking at the topology view, I can see the threat reaching the database. The threat reached the Angular page and hit the storefront microservice, then product, which is another microservice, which made a call to the database. I can also see what SQLs were executed by this client in the SQL widget. Here I see select statements. If one of them retrieved the customer's social security numbers, for example, I know that is a serious problem. I can also see where it originated from. It is from Overland Park, which is near Kansas City. Next, I will look at the threats marked as suspicious. In the map, I see the attack originated in Europe. I can click to see the bigger map, and this is Poland. Looking at the SQL widget, this user is running an update statement on the database. This could be still legitimate, however, it is better to look into it. I can do a contextual drill down to see the details by clicking the suspicious client. And this opens the APM Trace Explorer window, which is already pre-configured to show only the traces with this specific client where the client threat type is suspicious. So here are all the transactions this user was making. I see many traces that are failing with errors, so let me click one of them. I can review the transaction flow in the topology view and in the waterfall view. And here at the JDBC call the user made, I see an exclamation mark, which indicates the user execution actually failed with an error. In this case, the transaction was unsuccessful. You may want to investigate the user's intent, as it could be malicious behavior. Let me open the span details view to see the transaction details. Here I can see the attributes and values that are collected by APM for the root span of this trace. I can search the attribute, and the name of the user is Joe Black. So let's go back to the traces view. And using trace query language, you can easily create a query featured with a specific user. For convenience, I already created a query and added to the quick bar. In this query, the username is filtered to this suspicious user, Joe Black 31, and grouped by the client IP address and the location. In the query view, I see the same user is initiating calls from different locations. One of them was detected as a threat by the Threat Intelligence Service, but I can see the user actually used other 4 IP addresses to run transactions as well. I can also see the user attempted to purchase the same amount of merchandise all the time. This indicates the user might be executing an automated script or some kind that runs the same transaction from different locations. So using APM Trace Explorer, I can see the user's unusual behaviors, which helps me to make decisions on my next actions. This is the end of the recording of demonstration of how to use APM to evaluate potential damage caused by a client that was identified as a threat. Thank you for watching.